We're talking today with Wesley Pontier of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, can you begin with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Clifton, New Jersey. On October 4, whenever it was.
1921 is what you have in your record.
Right, 1921.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then, did you grow up there?
Grew up there, went to the Clifton schools, graduated from Clifton High School in 1939.
Okay. Now, what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My father was a carpenter. I would say a master carpenter. Depression time, didn't have a job sometimes. Did some jobs that were tough. Didn't make much money. My mother stayed at home.
Mm-hmm.
I had one brother. He's about 5 years younger than I was. I went through high school and then got a first job.
Okay. What sort of job did you get?
I worked in a hardware store. I worked 50 hours a week for $10 a week.
Wow. Okay. Now, by that time, by 1939, had the economy picked up enough that your father had more work, or was it still tough?
It was tough, yeah.
Because eventually war industry builds up and there's more jobs and things.
Well, yeah, and he did get more work during the war.
Okay. And then did you stay in that job at the hardware store until you went in the service, or did you change jobs?
No, I had changed jobs. I worked there for probably a little over a year and did everything from mixing grass seed to doing the books and installing windows and things like that. I got my first license the day I got the job and learned to park on the main street of the city of Clifton. Had to park quickly because there was a bus station at the same time. Yeah, basic job, but I would say that it set a pattern for the rest of the jobs that I had. Yeah. Then I worked for a used car company for a short time. I wasn't too happy with that, and then got a job working for a cotton printing company as a stockman.
Okay.
And worked for them for, I can't quite say how long. And then I got a job with the company I worked for the rest of my life on a very low basis. I even took less money to work for them because it was a good place to work.
Okay. And what place was that?
That was Manhattan Rubber Division of Ray Bestis, Manhattan.
Okay. Now, during this period, 1939, 40, 41, before Pearl Harbor,
Yeah.
were you paying much attention to what was happening in the world, or were you just focused on your own life and your own work?
Probably focused on my own life and work, and involved in church activities. My friends all were around the church activities.
Okay.
Like roller skating once a week.
Right. Okay. Do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, and it's a little vague at this point, but we didn't have a radio, but my father's sisters lived next to us, and they did have a radio, and that's when I heard of it. And from what I recall, it was kind of astounding, the whole bit,
Mm-hmm.
and had to get my focus on what was going on in the world at that point. I continued to work at that time. I had 2 short deferments because the draft was active and it was breathing over my shoulder. I determined when that second deferment was up that draft was going to get me. So the best thing I can do is enlist, make sure that I'm going down the path that I really wanted. I tried to enlist in the Coast Guard.
Okay. And why did you want to enlist in the Coast Guard?
I had another relative that was in the Coast Guard, and what he told me interested me. Yeah. They wouldn't take me because I had hay fever.
Okay.
I don't know what that has to do with it. So, following that, I determined that I would try to get into the Navy. I went to New York and signed up.
All right. So when did you actually enter the service? And that's in your notes there, but we'd
Yeah.
like you to tell us.
It was November of 1942.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And where did you do your training?
Bainbridge, Maryland, which at that time was still, not very well put together. We didn't have any paved roads. Everything was mud all the time. I was in Bainbridge for 3 months.
Okay. What did the training program there consist of?
Practically nothing, I would say. Well, when we first got in, and I was in company number 66, so that was early in Bainbridge history. We just got in, and somebody got scarlet fever in our company, so we were quarantined. So we were kept separate. When we went to the mess hall, we were separate. We were guarded. That went on until that quarantine was over, and then somebody else got scarlet fever. So we were in quarantine again. So most of the time we were in quarantine. So we were pretty much to ourselves.
Okay.
We did some drilling. As I said, we had wooden guns, which don't shoot. During that time, I had gotten ill for a little while. I was in sick bay, but came back and eventually the end of the training period was over. I did shoot a .22 rifle one time. And that was my total experience as far as that. There were things we were learning at the same time, but we were not like the rest of the companies.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually it was time to be assigned.
Okay. Now, before that, how much emphasis do they put on discipline, following orders, saluting, that kind of thing?
I would say enough. Nothing really unusual. Things we expected, and we did have a pretty good chief. So we had all the basic knowledge at that point.
Now, did they try to sort of, break you down and that kind of thing, like the Marines do, or was it kinder and gentler?
Yeah, it was gentler. And we spent an awful lot of time in the barracks because of the quarantine
Right.
and so forth.
Okay. All right.
I had, on Christmas Day, I had 2 slices of frozen bologna. I can still remember it. At the end of the training period, my grades when I entered in gave me the possibility of picking a school or going into ship's company. Well, I took ship's company and was put in the library, and for a short time was working in the library.
So at Bainbridge?
At Bainbridge.
Okay.
And then one day they wiped out ship's company and sent us to the Brooklyn Armed Guard Center, and we joined the Naval Armed Guard at that point.
Okay. Now, can you explain what the Naval Armed Guard was?
Every merchant ship of the U.S., and I believe I could put the United Kingdom mixed in
Right.
with that, had several guns. Basically, a cannon on the stern. Most of the cannons were built for World War I. And yeah, they were either 4-inch or 5-inch. They normally had an anti-aircraft gun on the bow. And the day I was brought to the ship, I walked down the gangway, and the bosun's mate, the Navy bosun's, well, I didn't finish the story. And the Navy put small crews on each merchant ship to man the guns and also do the signaling. I was brought to the ship, which was in New York. I walked down the gangway, and the bosun's mate, Navy bosun's mate, said, "Pontier, you were assigned to the 3-inch gun." I said, "What's a 3-inch gun?" My training at the Armed Guard Center consisted of about 5 days. We saw what were the big guns and the small guns, but really didn't touch any of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you really
Well,
didn't have any practice?
No, we got a basic knowledge of Yeah, who does what?
All right. Now, what ship were you going aboard at this point?
This was the SS Utah. That joined shortly after I got on it. That joined a convoy, and our destination was actually Cardiff, Wales. It was 30 days, and this is in March of 40.
43 now, yeah.
Yeah. It took 30 days to get to Liverpool. Most of that in convoy. We did spend 3 days in Halifax, Nova Scotia, before we finally assembled. That's where I learned what a gun was. And I will say the Canadian Navy did a spectacular job. Yeah, we fired some machine guns and other guns.
So did you have Canadian Navy personnel training you at that point? Or what? I mean, you said they did a great job. What were they doing?
Well, the Canadian Navy was handling that part of our training in conjunction with, but the Canadian Navy basically were the guardians of the convoy. And most of their Navy were in corvettes, which, if you were at sea, you would see their corvette and then you wouldn't see it. Because in March, the North Atlantic is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
The waves get pretty high. Now, I had a regular watch, and yeah, it's a little hard to recall exactly.
Okay. But the weather was rough, or at least high waves and swells?
All the time.
Okay.
It never stopped. And, you know, a 20-foot wave is not unusual. And we were in convoy. You would follow a buoy in the water and to maintain your position. At that point, I was a gunner, and I learned that I didn't care about that job very much. But that's what I was at that point.
Okay. Now, was your gun on the stern of the ship because it was a bigger gun?
No, I
Or was that on the bow, or?
On the bow.
Okay.
Yeah, the 3-inch anti-aircraft, dual purpose.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was a sight setter, and I recall one time in a practice run, I did the opposite from what I should. The projectile never did come down. But anyway, it took 30 days to get to Liverpool.
Now, did you have any U-boat scares along the way, or was it just bad weather?
It was regular weather, let's put it that way. We had one incident where the Canadians dropped some depth charges, but we never saw anything.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the only action we saw.
Okay.
We got to Liverpool 30 days, and then we went to Cardiff, Wales. Now, the ship that I was on, the Utah,
Mm-hmm.
was built in 1916.
Was it a freighter or a troop ship?
Freighter.
A freighter? Okay.
About 10,000 tons, as I recall it. And as Navy personnel, we had our own quarters and our own mess. We got the same food as the merchant crew, not the same pay.
Mm-hmm.
Spent a couple of weeks in Cardiff where we unloaded, and at that point the dock area at Cardiff had been pretty well bombed out. And now things get a little bit hazy, returned to the States.
Okay. While you were in Cardiff, you got to go ashore, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so what was there to do at that point?
I palled around with the merchant deck cadet at that time, and there was a play going on in the town. It was The Man Who Came to Dinner.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to see that, and we sat next to a woman there, and we said, where can we go to have a bite to eat or tea? So she told us, and she said, oh, my husband is a pharmacist, whatever you call a pharmacist.
Chemist in England, yeah.
She said, and he can get gasoline. She said, how about coming to our house for dinner? So we made arrangements to go to their house for dinner one of the days after that. And of course, we talked to our the chief mess man, and got a chicken and some other things that we took along with us.
Mm-hmm.
They provided us with bicycles. They became very friendly with us, and he was able to get gasoline for his car, so we did get around a little bit in the Cardiff area.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful spot to be. Actually made friendship which lasted quite a few years with my wife, who was not my wife yet.
Mm-hmm.
She corresponded with him for years.
Okay. All right.
Then we went back to the States.
Yeah.
And I believe at that time we had made a trip to Cuba for sugar. And I can still remember the port that we loaded up, and it was Nuevitas in Cuba. And the Cuban men would have loads of sugar and carry them.
Just going to pause that.
I think
All right. So you were talking, you were in Cuba and watching the Cuban men loading sugar.
to get a load of sugar, brought it back to the States. And then, and I'm not quite sure of the sequence of things, but the ship went through the Panama Canal, down through the Panama Canal to the west coast of South America. And we stopped at Guayaquil Bay to unload some of our cargo, and from there to I believe it was Talara, Peru. Again, we had cargo to unload at Talara.
Did you have escorts? Were you with a convoy or by yourself?
No, we were by ourselves at that point. Yeah. And then from there to Antofagasta, Chile. Spent several days in Antofagasta. Learned that when you went to the store and wanted to buy some bananas, the price went up. And you'd say, what's this? Oh, Americano, mucho rich. Anyway, spent some time in Antofagasta. Interesting spot. And we'd go ashore and found that all of the young kids had a sister.
Mm-hmm.
And that was typical. And some of our personnel visited the sisters, and of course some of the merchant crew did too.
Mm-hmm.
From there we went to Valparaiso, Chile, one of the beautiful ports in South America. As I recall, it's built on 7 hills, somewhat like Rome. Yeah. And I think I skipped a spot.
That's okay. You can go back to it.
Yeah. In the meantime, went to Lima, Peru. And I did celebrate a birthday in Lima.
Mm-hmm.
Each of those ports had service clubs, most of them run by girls who lived there, most of them with an English background.
Mm-hmm.
We were treated very well in all of the ports, and just had interesting times learning a little bit about the people and I'm not sure whether it was this trip or another one there. Had an invitation to go to somebody's house at Viña del Mar, which was the resort city in Chile.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. But they took care of us and were good to us. Went back after the visit there, went back to, I'll have to say, ended up at New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And the ship was there. We had some leave, and I know we weren't supposed to go further than so many miles. However, a couple of us got on the train and went to New York. I wanted to see my girlfriend.
Right.
And it was like 30-some hours to New York. We didn't even have a seat. We did that, came back, and then the story gets a little bit hazy. At that point, went back to New York, and I was relieved from that ship, and I went to the merchant. In the meantime, I didn't want to be a gunner, so I got a book and started to learn something about signalings and so forth. I got back to the Armed Guard Center in New York. They sent me to the Merchant Signaling School in Norotan Heights, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 4-week thing there. I did get my rating, and again, it gets a little hazy, and I'm not a journaler.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about signaling, is this radio work or using
No.
the signal devices on the ships?
No, this was basically flags.
Okay.
And
And the blinkers?
blinker.
Yeah.
Blinker light. Yeah, we learned semaphore, but never used semaphore.
Mm-hmm.
But we did learn the blinker, the code, and so forth. So we were capable of handling that. And we did have to, once in a while, have to identify the ship. So at that point, I was reassigned to the Kentuckian, which was a sister ship, as old as the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And we went back to South America, and I did the same group of ports.
Mm-hmm.
So I had met some people on the first trip, re-met them again. So it was a little bit of old home week.
Mm-hmm.
And on that trip, we went one port further to Santiago, Chile,
Mm-hmm.
and loaded up with copper. That was a copper port. Went back to and ended up I'll say New York again, and I'm not positive of that. I think we had hit first, we had hit Key West and then went to New York.
Now, when you were in the Caribbean or going up the U.S. coast, did you have escorts then? Were you with convoys?
No,
Okay. So you were not worrying about U-boats anymore?
I'm not sure we didn't worry about them, but on the west coast of South America, there was no activity.
Yeah.
There was still activity on the east coast of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just backtrack a little. Living in New Jersey at that part of the war, if you were on the Jersey shore at night, you might see the glow of a ship burning.
Mm-hmm.
So they were that close to us.
Right.
Yeah. So back to the story. I, from getting back to the States again, then joined, from what I recall, the largest convoy that was ever assembled. It didn't take us 30 days to get across that time. And at that point, I was one of the signalmen on in the convoy at one of the points that relayed information. I'll say the admiral would run up the flags, and then we would pick that up and put the flags up for our section of the convoy.
Mm-hmm.
So that was basically how the convoy was handled.
Now, do you know roughly when that convoy was sailing? Are we in 44 yet, or? Yeah,
this was in 44. the day before D-Day, my ship was in the North Sea. And from what we could determine, we saw ships with soldiers standing on the decks, going somewhere, same way we were going. So we knew at that point that there was something big going on with the next day or so.
So to be in the North Sea is between England and Denmark and the Netherlands.
No, between England and Ireland.
Okay, it's the Irish Sea.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we were heading that way, and what we could, what we determined after, we had cargo that would have been very valuable on the beaches. However, the ship was so old and had so many stanchions in it that they figured they couldn't unload it fast enough. So they put us into Plymouth, England, and I arrived in Plymouth, England on D-Day. And spent 2 weeks in Plymouth.
All right. And so what was that like? I mean, was there a lot of news coming back, or people speculating, or was it business as usual?
I'd say it's kind of half business as usual. Now, Plymouth, the town, didn't have a brick on brick at that point. Well, there were parts of it that were in good shape yet. But basically, they had been pretty well bombed out. My visit in Plymouth, and again, it was interesting because if you went 5 miles out, you were in some beautiful country. Now, I always had the habit of finding a church, and people took you right in. And that worked out very well in Plymouth. I wouldn't say that we did anything very special, but we knew what was going on at that point. And some of the first people that had been wounded or so came back to Plymouth. We didn't see that particularly. And after our stay, unloading our ship in Plymouth, we started back for the States. We got as far as Dublin, and they stopped us and turned us around and sent us back to Cardiff, Wales. At Cardiff, they took most of us off the ship, left a very basic crew, I think one signalman, and I don't even think there were any gunners at that point. And a very small merchant crew. But they loaded the ship with concrete. They took the ship over to the beach and sunk it as a breakwater. They sent us back, or at least the Navy crew went to Scotland to wait for a troop ship to take us back to the States. Did get a troop ship, and it happened to be a brand new cruise vessel, the SS America, which at that point had changed to the what was it, the Navy ship,
Okay, so now it was a USS rather than an SS.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it wasn't the U.S.
That's America. Okay.
Yeah,
Now, so you're on a troop ship. Was that going back to the States now?
going back to the States.
And who was on it? The troops are all going to Europe.
Yeah, but there were Navy personnel back and going back to the States. There was the first group of German prisoners, most of whom were officers. They were kept separately, but I recall very interesting things when the Navy personnel went through the mess hall, got their food. There were barrels of leftovers. When the Germans went through, I saw a German officer drop a piece of bread on the wet deck, pick it up and put it on his plate. They hadn't had real bread in years.
Now, were these Germans who had been captured in Normandy, do you think, or maybe somewhere else earlier, or do you have no idea?
I think this was all Normandy
Okay.
or whatever at that point. And they came back, came to the States, and then I think they ended up in not Fort Dix, but whatever the internment was at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's on my mind, but it's so deep in.
Well, there were a lot of internment camps, and they actually used some of them at the bases, like Camp Shanks, eventually to serve men
Yeah,
coming home
yeah.
later on.
At that point, my wife and I had, she wasn't my wife, we had talked about marriage. She knew that I was due for a 30-day leave, and I was coming back soon. Well, I got back, and she had set up a complete wedding in our home church with some of our friends who hadn't gone to war, and had the whole bit.
Now, do you know if that was difficult to do in some ways because of rationing? I mean, even to make a wedding cake, you needed sugar and that kind of thing.
Oh, we went to a hotel for the dinner.
Okay.
We borrowed a car, which was her brother's car, and he was in Europe fighting the war. So we borrowed a car and had a one-week honeymoon at the Jersey Shore. I can go to other stories about the Jersey Shore, but that's aside.
Well, was it still under blackout at night?
Oh yeah, yeah, and going back even in 1940, when I was still living at home in New Jersey, we had an anti-aircraft gun emplacement 1 block from my house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
we did get married.
Mm-hmm.
And had a 1-week honeymoon with a borrowed car and so forth. We got gas coupons from friends
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. Just a wonderful setup. And then I went back to the Armed Guard Center in Brooklyn and was to be assigned to a new ship. So I went to the ready room and sat and waited and a ship came up going out of either San Francisco or L.A. But they wanted 2 signalmen. And here's 2 guys sitting alongside of me that said, "Oh, we'd like that one." So they got that ship. And I was assigned to a Danish tanker, the MS Peter Hurl, which was running out of Bayonne, New Jersey to Aruba. Gee, that's pretty nice.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just Bayonne to Aruba along the west coast and so forth. We ran alone all the time. And there was still some submarine activity, and I read something about that just recently. But we went back and forth to Aruba 14 times that year. I'm the original tourist to Aruba. I was home every 16 days because I was still living in New Jersey,
Right.
just a little north of Bayonne. So I had been home every 16 days or so during that year.
Did you ever have a U-boat scare with those trips, or was it all quiet?
No, it was all quiet. But now, let me just interject something.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called Shadow Divers. 2 fellows from Bayonne, New Jersey, after the war, just several years ago, were doing some diving, free diving, scavenging ships that had sunk off the coast. In their diving, they found a German submarine. The Germans never knew what happened to that submarine. That was right off the coast of Brielle, New Jersey. They reconstructed the story. Well, they got in touch with Germany, and they actually saw some of them went to Germany and saw the relatives of the men that had been on that ship.
Mm-hmm.
But what they reconstructed, and this, I guess they had to do some guessing, that submarine probably sent a torpedo at a ship on the Jersey coast. It was a homing torpedo. It turned around and homed on them.
Yeah, well, Germans did have some problems with their torpedoes, so
Yeah.
that's certainly possible.
So, and they found that submarine, and actually talked to the
Right.
relatives back in Germany.
Okay. So what did you think of Aruba at that point?
Aruba was very interesting at that point. It was not a tourist spot yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we would pull into dock at, the main town was Oranjestad, and spend a couple of days because we would just go down. And we took water to Aruba.
Mm-hmm.
We had special tanks on the ship that we could take water to Aruba because they had no facilities to get water,
Okay.
really. And they were getting oil from Venezuela, Lake Maracaibo.
Mm-hmm.
And Aruba had a refinery. So they would do some basic refining, and we would pick up the oil from Aruba. And it would take us just a couple days. In the meantime, we could just go swimming or whatever and check Aruba out. And it was, at that point, it was mostly Dutch and the native population. And I would say our times were very short there all the time. But we did learn a little bit about Aruba. And I've been there once after that with my wife. And we did the tourist thing.
Now, basically, is this what you now did for the rest of the war until your discharge, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, I was relieved from that ship. And at that point, I had enough points to be discharged. And as I can calculate, the best I can calculate by just extrapolating some numbers, I put in about 80,000 miles at sea. And then was relieved from my duty on the Peter Hurl, and at that point was sent to Lido Beach, Long Island, for my discharge.
Okay. And so when was that roughly? Was that September, or?
That was September of '45.
Okay. Now, during the time when you're making all these trips back and forth to Aruba, were you kind of following the news of the war and how things were going, or did you just mind your own business?
I would say we minded our own business.
Okay.
You know, we had
Do you remember hearing about things like the German surrender, the atomic bomb, or the Japanese surrender?
Well, the atomic bomb, I think, was after I got out.
No, it was August.
Yeah. Well,
Were you back home by then, or not discharged yet, but?
probably a little hazy at that
Okay.
point.
Yeah, I think maybe the final Japanese surrender signing might have been by the time you got home.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I was back at that point. Yeah, we knew about what was going on,
Right.
but not that well connected because we had our own business to do.
Okay. A different kind of question for you. You served on these sort of 3 different ships. What sorts of people did they have in the merchant crews for those ships? Where were they from, or what were they like?
I would say on the U.S. ships, mostly the Americans. Yeah. And they were, I'll say, a motley crew. Yeah. We ate pretty well. Some of the cooks weren't that good. And I recall one, he was a heavy-set black fella. He was the ship's cook. Came into port one day and he said, "Man, I gotta go ashore and get something good to eat."
Yeah, that's not encouraging.
And our connection with the merchant crew was generally very good. We had some incidents where, well, I learned what cockroaches were, quite a few of them. And we had a mess man, one of the merchant crew was our mess man, and he didn't like us. And I recall one day he sprayed the overhead before we came in. Roaches were dropping on our tables. I believe at that point he was threatened that any more things like that, he wouldn't quite make it home. But generally, we had good relationships with the crew. Now, on the tanker, my bunk area was midships, and I had a buzzer at my bunk if they wanted me to call me. But I did generally stay in the watch anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because it's about all you have to do.
Right.
Well, you can read a book or things like that.
Now, was the crew of that ship Danish, or were they from different places?
No, they were mostly Danish or at least Scandinavian.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And yeah, a little short captain. And we always said he was so cheap he would walk from coming ashore in New York. He'd walk the distance up to Fifth Avenue and so forth, just to save a nickel.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the first mate. I can still, going out of New York, we approached another ship coming in, and it was flying a red flag, which said they had ammunition aboard. We're still a mile away, and I can still hear him hollering to the helmsman, "Hard to starboard, hard to starboard." He didn't want to get anywhere near that ship.
Mm-hmm.
A few things like that I can recall. But generally, we had good relationships with, and for my part, at least on the Yukon, I had made friends with the merchant deck cadet who was there to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And we got friendly and
Right. So he was training to be a merchant marine officer, basically?
he was training to be a merchant marine officer.
Okay.
And I lost track of the second time I had gone back to Cardiff. I managed to see some people that he was also, and he had turned up at their home. The ship that he was on had been sunk, and he had turned up at their home. I don't know how he got there with just the clothes on his back.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last I had heard of him. But at least he was alive. And,
Right. Okay. Now, we get back to September 45, you're out of the service, now what do you do?
Well, I could go back to where I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I was given a new job there. I was an expediter, handling some of the product that we were making, and I had contact with the main customer, and we were making V-belts, both the fractional horsepower and the larger V-belts for doing some of the larger jobs. And I had one customer that I had to handle, and I would get as many as 20 telegrams a day from them.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this and whatnot. And I stuck with that for a while, but then I saw an opportunity to, they were having a training program for time study men. So I was able to get into that program and became a time study man. And then I had a couple of assignments there. And this was Manhattan Rubber, or Raybestos Manhattan. The name says asbestos.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first jobs, and this was in the training job, was studying an operation where they were mixing the asbestos compound for industrial brake linings. They would take and dump the bags of asbestos on the deck.
Okay. Now this tape is just about done, so we're gonna stop here, reload. All right, now we were talking about your time with Raybestos, and you're still in New Jersey at this point?
At that point, I was in New Jersey yet,
Mm-hmm.
but then I was transferred later to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and most of this was, well, I had been time study man in
Mm-hmm.
Passaic, New Jersey,
Mm-hmm.
for some time at several departments. And while I was in the time study work, one of the sales, well, he was one of the managers, asked me if I'd like to get into the sales department, basically as a sales engineer to help the salesmen in their jobs, and also go out and do some visits with the salesmen. So, and that led to other things. And you look back at my history at Raybestos. Well, in the meantime, I had gone to Fairleigh Dickinson at night and got about 2 years of industrial engineering subjects, which never got put together, but were basic to what I had learned.
Mm-hmm.
So I had all kinds of jobs after that. I was involved in visiting salesmen, customers, and eventually the jobs changed, and I ended up in Charleston, South Carolina, at Raybestos, or U.S. Asbestos at that point. This was my bigger exposure to asbestos.
Mm-hmm.
And with the associations I had made in the New Jersey and Bridgeport, Connecticut settings, I had some good association with customers, and they wanted to talk to me, even though I wasn't in the same job.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to talk to me, and I did do well. I had not written catalogs, but edited catalogs. I was part of two industry groups that I was on editing committees. One was the packing manufacturers, and one was the rubber sheet manufacturers. So I was on editing committees for both of them for pamphlets that they were writing at that point. I had one time ended up at the patent court in New York. There was a discussion about a certain patent and what should make it available for taxing and whatnot. And I was at the court being checked out by 3 judges, and in the end, what I had brought helped settle the case for that type of material from that on. So that was kind of an experience too. But I was involved in advertising, I was involved in manufacturing. As I say, I had customer contact. We were making a part for the space program. We were making an asbestos cover for one of the motors so that it would protect the other section. I went to Rocketdyne in California to talk about that. We were also involved in the utility thing where they're trying to clean up their act. We were making, well, when you think about clean air and the utility industry, they're pumping out a lot of stuff. Talking about 1,000 degrees, it goes through these large, what do I call them? But they're steel, and steel does this. So we were making expansion joints for between sections. And one day that my superior said, you go out and supervise installation. I said, oh, crap. Yeah, I've never done this, and ended up at Miamisburg in Ohio. Telling their crew how to install this thing, which I had never done myself. And I wouldn't go out on the platform either. And we installed it, it was fine. I came back and wrote a manual on how to install.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of different things to do over the course of your career.
Over the years, I had many different things.
How did you wind up in Michigan?
Through Florida.
Okay.
I had gotten to the point where there were changes at work, and I wasn't happy with what was going on. And I had been there for a long, 42 years. And in the meantime, this was in 1981, my brother, who was a bachelor, had built a house in Florida, Anna Maria, Florida. Never used it for himself, rented it out. And we were living in the Charleston area and loved it, still like it. I decided, and then my brother died. he was very astute with money and with real estate and so forth. So I came into more than I had ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
My father was still alive. He was 92 years old. He lived in New Jersey with my brother. My brother died. My father came to live with us in Charleston for a little while, 16 months. But anyway, at that point I decided I'm ready to quit.
Right.
Yeah. So I turned in my resignation. They gave me a little dinner, and that was about it. And then that the house in Florida became mine,
Mm-hmm.
and I was renting it to the same people that had rented it from my brother for years. And they were the kind of people that would call him up in New Jersey and say, "Will, is it all right if we hang a picture?"
Mm-hmm.
And so I still had those same tenants. Well, for some reasons, and they had a bad accident. They wanted to get off the island. They left.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I said, "You know, I'd like to live there myself."
Mm-hmm.
So we determined that we'd make a change, and they had left. I had somebody there for a while, but it didn't work out. I'm not going to be a long-term landlord.
Right.
So at that point, we decided we'd make a change. Moved, sold the house in Charleston, and then lived in Anna Maria Island for 9 years. And at that point, my wife was, now we're talking, this is over 60 years of marriage.
Mm-hmm.
She was starting to use the wheelchair a little bit. And I was doing everything inside the house and outside the house, maintaining things, trying to go fishing beside that, things like that. And we had visited friends who were living here.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter was living in Rockford.
Okay.
So somehow we got talking to the salesperson. She talked to us, and this wing, starting from where we walked in
Mm-hmm.
there, was not built yet. They were ready to build it. And she convinced us that, you know, it wouldn't be ready for a year, you wouldn't be available, nothing would be available, and so forth. And, if you wanted to, you could back out, and so on. Well, eventually, we did make a decision to come in.
Mm-hmm.
We had the opportunity to, it's only 2 weeks later, we get the opportunity to pick a place. It's either the 5th floor
Mm-hmm.
or the 1st floor. Well, she was starting to use the wheelchair. She said, well, if we get stuck on the 5th floor, you've got to depend on that
Mm-hmm.
elevator, and
Yeah.
it may not be working. So we're going to take the best decision I ever made.
Yeah, you have a yard.
Yeah, and I can garden between this apartment and the next apartment. When I put everything together and write it down, all the different plants that are in this area, I had 28 varieties. Some of them not doing so good at this point. But anyway, so we made the best decision in our life.
Okay. Also, just a different thing. We came in here, you pointed to a painting in the hallway and said you did this. So you're an artist as well, or how does that fit in the picture?
Well, that's the word artist. I'm not sure about that. I'm a painter.
Okay.
A number of years ago, we were still in, what was it, New Jersey yet, before we made our moves. I had been an elder in our church, and then had to take a year off in between. Well, there was a high school class in town that offered a painting course. And I thought, well, I can doodle. I got the time, I'll go to that. About 5 weeks later, I had a painting that we could hang. I had an instructor who was the art teacher at the high school. In 1963, he sold one of his paintings for $600. So you can gather what kind of a background. And he gave us such a good background that you could use it for watercolor sketching. You could use it for any medium if you had some talent. And apparently I had some talent. And over the years, painted.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly for my own enjoyment and for others that might have been interested. And I'll just say, when we moved to Charleston, I became, with another church, I was an elder there too, and in Charleston, you could only ever figure 3 years for anybody because it was it was a military town, a couple of colleges, hospitals, a couple of hospitals, teaching hospitals, and so forth. We'd have one of the elders would be moving to another state. I'd give them a sketch,
Mm-hmm.
black and white sketch. And just this past winter, I got a card from one of the wives of one of the elders. In fact, they were teaching at Purdue. And she said, we still have that picture
Mm-hmm.
hanging. And that was 25 years later.
Oh.
Yeah. So, most of the paintings have been, well, there's one.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one.
Here we are.
That's one of my first ones.
Okay. Now, I guess to kind of close out here, to kind of look back at the time that you spent in the Navy, how do you think that affected you, or what did you learn from doing that?
Trying to put it in perspective. I'd say basically learning how to follow instructions and trying to keep my nose clean.
Yeah, there was a lot of trouble you could have gotten into.
Yeah, because I was in all of these ports in South America,
Mm-hmm.
whose you went ashore and there'd be these little kids with sisters,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd have a card and you could go anywhere you want.
There's that, and there's the bars, and there's all the rest of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So, what basically I tried wherever I went is to find out something about where I was and do the things that were available for me, and at times was quite astounded of what went on in the various places that I was. And one time we're in Lima, Peru, and one of our Navy men, of course he got drunk, and everybody he saw then would turn into be a Nazi. And he did some things that were not so good. He ended up in the jail in Lima, Peru. And our Navy lieutenant asked me to go with him to the jail and see if we couldn't get him out. But there were things like that happened. And another thing, we were in one of the ports in South America, and the bumboats came alongside, and the guys were selling canaries. And a couple of our guys bought either canaries, and they bought the bird seed. And we were in Valparaiso, and one night I'm in my bunk and here are these guys sitting in the bunk beneath me, and they're half drunk. They're dipping their finger in the bird seed and having bird seed. And at the same time, one of the fellas came off of Liberty, and he was drunk, and he couldn't find the gangway, so he tried to climb the lines. He made it. And another one came in, and he wanted to take a shower, and on those ships, the way you got hot water was to add steam to cold water. Well, he burned himself in the shower. So there's some things that were really, and another one in Cuba, half the crew went, our Navy crew went to a bar and they busted the thing all up. So there's some interesting spots along the way. But if you were careful to do things as right as you could, things were pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw places that I, in my lifetime, would never have seen. I developed a love for the sea. Now, my wife and I, we went on 11 cruises. And that became one of the sources of pleasure. And it didn't bother me if the waves were high. That's part of it.
All right. Now, just for the record, here is my last question. I've talked to an awful lot of veterans who took sea voyages and things. And one of the things they tell me is that, and this is usually guys on troop ships, but they go out, first time, everybody gets seasick except them. And I wonder about that. Did you get seasick when you first went out?
Never.
Okay. Did you have any means of controlling it, or were you just lucky?
I might have come close to it once or twice, and I don't remember what I did at that point. Well, I know what caused it. One time I was sitting on the deck above the galley and they were cooking. I was absorbing some of but I was able to just pass it off somehow. And one other time, which I think was early, what happened, I ate an apple and everything was fine. But I never had a real sensation of being sick. Now, I won't say that we were kind to some of the other guys that came aboard and talk about, a piece of salt pork on a string and things like that. So I think we caused some seasickness along the way.
All right. All right. I'd just like to close here by thanking you for taking the time to share the story today.
Oh, that's fine. And it helped me think back to what part of my life was.
Yeah, you get to be back in your 20s again.
Yeah.